Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dory, and we like to talk about the dark and unexplainable. Tonight's episode of GoriDoriStory, we're going to be taking a ride down to Connecticut. They say the forest of Connecticut is full of life. Trees, ghosts, whispers, animals, a village that nobody ever talks about, wildlife. But deep within the woods lies a place so cursed that the trees seem to recoil from it. This is a place called Dudleytown. To better understand why this land is so cursed, we would need to go back to the very beginning, in England around 1510, where a powerful man named Edmund Dudley served under the King Henry VII as his most trusted advisor. To some, he was brilliant. He was a man who rose from nothing to holding the very purse strings of the whole United Kingdom. To others, he was a predator, squeezing the nobility and poor for every coin that he could, enforcing laws with ruthless precision, and smiling while he did it. For years, he had served the King Henry VII with iron loyalty, enriching the crown, protecting its coffers, and playing the villain so that his king could shine. But when King Henry VII died in 1509, everything collapsed. Now that King Henry VIII wears the crown, Dudley was no longer an ally. He was an inconvenience, a symbol of everything the young king wanted to bury. The young king needed to prove himself different from his father, and what better way to win the hearts of his people than to sacrifice the very man that everyone already hated. Within days, Dudley and his ally, Richard Epson, was dragged from their home and accused of constructive treason. Dudley tried to defend himself, insisting that he had only obeyed his orders from his master, but it didn't matter. The crowd wanted blood, and the crown wanted to give it to them. They were marked as villains and then locked away in the Tower of London and turned into the very symbol of the old king's corruption. On the night of his death, he stumbled across forbidden texts, old inscriptions of hex and oath that carried from the shadows, England's oldest pagan rituals. By candlelight, John learned what it meant to not just curse a man, but to curse a whole bloodline. On the day of the execution, Edmund Dudley walked to the executioner block. Some of the witnesses jeered, spitting curses at the man who had once taken so much from them. Others just stood in silence, watching the fall of a man who had once seemed untouchable. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with the knowledge that he had played the game of kings and lost. As he placed his head upon the block, he spoke, not to the crowd, not to the king, not to the executioner, but to the unseen. Out of spite of betrayal, and to ensure that he was the last Dudley that would ever take a seat in the royal court, he laid a curse upon his own name and his descendants. They would be plagued with madness, ruin, and untimely death, just like he was. Then the axe fell. When the axe came down, it wasn't just the end of Edmund Dudley. It was the end of an era. Death was the King Henry's first message. The old ways are gone, and a new reign had begun. A few decades later, his son, John Dudley, later became the Duke of Northumberland. Born into disgrace, branded by his father's execution, John had to work his way back up from ruins with charm, cunning, and relentless ambition. He rose through the ranks of England, first a soldier, then an admiral, then a power broker, until he stood at the very right-hand side of King Edward VI. By 1550, John Dudley was England's invisible king, ruling through a boy who wore a crown. But power is fragile when it rests on borrowed time. The young King Edward was dying of tuberculosis. Waiting for the throne was Edward's Catholic half-sister, but if she ruled, everything John had built would be torn apart. As Edward VI's health began to plunge, John Dudley's web of ambition wrapped even tighter around the throne. So, Dudley played the boldest move in all of England history. He wedded his own son, Guilford Dudley, to Lady Jane Grey, a girl who was royal blood but had no thirst for power. Exactly the key to Dudley's grand design. On Edward's deathbed, he convinced Edward to rewrite the succession, naming Lady Jane Grey as the heir, cutting off Mary and Elizabeth Tudor. The young king died on July 6, 1553. And on July 10th, Jane was proclaimed queen. For 9 days, the Dudleys got to taste the crown lifestyle, with lavish parties and royal banquets. But within those 9 glorious days, the curse started to manifest. What Edmund Dudley had unleashed on the chopping block decades ago has now come to life, whispering through the court chamber, poisoning its alliances, and unraveling power. Through the family curse, Dudley's plan collapses almost as quickly as it began. Mary fled to East Anglia, gathering local supporters and powerful nobles who were both deeply uneasy about Dudley's power grab. Her campaign allowed her to amass a large army fort near the Flemmingham Castle. Meanwhile, in London, the support for Lady Jane Grey began to waver. When Mary's letter declaring herself the rightful queen reached London, Dudley gamble began to unravel. The key officials and the Privy Council were notice of the scandal and quickly shifted alliances. There, they made the change official. The Privy Council abandoned Jane and declaring Mary queen. Later that day, John Dudley and Lady Jane Grey were both arrested by the royal guard and then publicly beheaded for treason against the throne. For Dudley, this was more than a political fail. It was the curse of Edmund finally taking hold and crushing their grasp around England once and for all. But the curse didn't stop there. No. It only grew as new generations were born. Centuries later, the shadows of Edmund Dudley's curse crossed the ocean. His descendants settled in the quiet hills of Connecticut, carving out a small community that came to be known as Dudleytown. At first, it seemed like any other village. Humble farm, family building lives in the wilderness, and free-range chickens. That was until the curse started to take effect on not only the descendants, but on the nearby villagers that lived there. Neighbors began to fall ill without a cause. Farmers went mad, tearing apart their own homes. Children vanished without a trace. Strange deaths to cattle, lightning strike, crop failures, raid, suicide, madness, you name it. Misfortune after misfortune could no longer be ignored. The people of Dudleytown began to believe that what had followed the Dudleys from England was not just history, but a living curse. Fear took hold. One by one, families decided to leave their homes. By the late 1800s, Dudleytown stood empty. The fields went silent, houses rotted, and the forest swallowed the roads. Today, Dudleytown is like any other abandoned settlement. Moss-covered stone walls, faint cellar holes, and strictly off-limits. Private land with no trespassing sign posted everywhere. Officials insist that it's just to protect hikers from unsafe terrain. But locals will tell you a different story. The locals say the land itself is poisoned, not with toxin, but with something older, something hungry. Those who trespass report an overwhelming dread, silence heavier than the air, as if unseen hands are pressed against their chest. Shadows move against the light, darting between the trees, and eyes always watching. A man once camped near the ruins, only to wake screaming, convinced something was clawing at his tent. He left in the middle of the night, swearing shadowy figures were chasing him down the trail. Another visitor reported seeing hundreds of glowing orbs floating between the trees, only to vanish as he approached. If you ever find yourself near those woods, don't go looking for the village, because the village is already looking for you. Okay, imagine buying a land in the 1700s only for it to come with free curses, ghosts, and an internal subscription to bad luck. I would never get bored. It's like living in a real-life Final Destination, but Connecticut edition. Ugh. Locals say that if you wander near the ruins, you'll feel shadows watching you, which, okay, it's probably the same energy as me scrolling Instagram at 3 a.m. The difference is, at least my curse doesn't eat hikers, they eat dreams. The part that kills me though, it's a private property now, which means if you do try to ghost hunt in Dudleytown, odds are that the cops are just scarier than the actual ghost. Imagine explaining in jail that you trespassed because a shadow whispered, "Come closer." They may buy it, who knows? Buddy, maybe just skip the cursed woods hike and just go get some Dunkins instead. Unless you want to be haunted by glowing orb and whispers and the crushing regrets of trespassing fines, but that's a hard pass for me though. That's tonight's GoriDoriStories. Follow for more haunting legends and tell me down in the comment section which place should we explore next. My name's Dory, and I'll see you in the next one. Toodaloo!